My son and I crafted a snowman, a simple figure gracing our yard. To Karen, the president of our homeowners association, it represented a transgression. She didn't stop at mere warnings. She escalated, trespassing onto our property. With a roar of her SUV's engine, she deliberately plowed through it. Little did she grasp the resilience concealed beneath its surface. Not just frozen water, but reinforced steel and a tree stump I had previously brought to the HOA's attention years ago. She harbored the illusion that intimidation would compel our compliance, but instead she found herself with a demolished vehicle, a neighborhood united in opposition, and a snowman that steadfastly refused to be dismantled. This narrative transcends a mere winter tale. It speaks of authority, of dissent, and the consequences when a bully discovers that outward softness does not equate to inner frailty. My name is James, and this is the chronicle of how a snowman became the catalyst for unseating an HOA autocrat. The entire saga truly commenced with a lightning-scarred oak stump that resisted succumbing. 3 winters prior, a summer tempest had descended from the west, akin to a furious barrage of artillery. The sky adopted the hue of a fresh bruise, the wind shrieked through the pines, and a solitary bolt, incandescent and deafening, struck the grandest oak in our front garden. The ensuing detonation rattled our home with such force that Jack, then 7 years old, sought refuge beneath the kitchen table, crying out for his mother. Clara had been absent for 8 months by that point, yet in that instant the thunder's roar bore an uncanny resemblance to her name. When the smoke dissipated, the tree stood fractured down its center, half of it severed with the precision of a divine axe. The lower third remained firmly rooted, scorched black, and utterly unyielding. I arranged for a crew to remove the fallen upper portion, but I left the stump in place. There was something about it that felt like a tribute to the tree, to Clara, to all that is struck down yet continues to endure. Each December since, that stump has been enveloped by a pristine white blanket, rendering it invisible to unsuspecting delivery drivers, hurried teenagers after curfew, and even salt truck operators who misjudged their turns. After the second collision in as many years, I began planting a 6-foot bright orange reflective pole directly into its heart the moment the initial snowflakes began to fall. This pole had, to my knowledge, prevented at least 3 vehicle accidents and likely more. No one ever arrived at my doorstep bearing cookies or a 6-pack as a token of gratitude. Instead, the year Karen Stapleton ascended to the presidency of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association, I received a formal notification accompanied by a $50 citation for establishing an unauthorized marker deemed a hazard in direct contravention of Aesthetic Conformity Clause 4.2b. I promptly remitted the payment, affixing a yellow sticky note that read, "Merry Christmas, glad your husband's Lexus still boasts an intact front bumper," and returned it. She never cashed the check. That cancelled check now resides, framed in inexpensive black, on my garage wall, positioned between my welding certification and a faded photograph of Clara, her face alight with laughter, holding Jack on her hip like a slumbering koala on a pier in Virginia Beach. My son, Jack, now 10 years old, his nose dusted with freckles like cinnamon on oatmeal, and utterly convinced he is merely one growth spurt away from embodying Captain America, never perceived the stump as a peril. To him, it was enchantment disguised as timber. One week, it transformed into the crow's nest of a pirate vessel. The next, a sentinel's watchtower. And on particularly exhilarating afternoons, it served as the perfect launching platform for snowball projectiles capable of felling imaginary invading forces at a range of 25 yards. He had christened the stump Old Thunder during the very first winter following the strike, and each year he greeted it as a familiar companion once the snow concealed its scars. That particular winter, the snowfall arrived with uncharacteristic promptness and a robust intensity. It commenced during the initial week of December, with thick wet flakes drifting straight down and adhering to every surface like confectioner's sugar on a wedding cake. Jack and I dedicated an entire Saturday outdoors, our shovels moving in synchronized rhythm, our breath visible in the frigid air. We cleared the walkway, the driveway, and even the path to the mailbox for Mrs. Delgato, our neighbor, whose hip had been causing her discomfort. By the time the sun began its descent, casting an orange glow behind the bare maple trees, our gloves were saturated, our cheeks were wind-chapped, and our noses were running uncontrollably. Jack dropped his shovel, planted his feet wide apart, and gazed up at me with that characteristic grin, a blend of playful mischief and daring challenge that invariably signaled the onset of the best kind of trouble. "Dad," he said, his voice slightly muffled by the scarf Clara had lovingly knitted for him the Christmas before her illness. "We're building the single most colossal, the most legendary snowman this entire homeowners association has ever witnessed. A record-breaking creation, so monumental they'll have to revise the bylaws because of us." I opened my mouth, intending to utter the sensible suggestion. "Karen will absolutely lose her mind. We'll receive another letter. Let's just maintain the peace." But the words caught somewhere behind the lump forming in my throat, because in that very moment, with snowflakes catching in his eyelashes and the porch light casting its gentle glow behind us, he resembled Clara so profoundly that it caused a pang of sorrow. She had always been the one to prevent the world's trivial regulations from extinguishing the joy of a 10-year-old boy. She would have been out here until midnight, enthusiastically packing snow and erupting in laughter. So instead, I heard myself say, "Only if we position him directly atop Old Thunder. Let's make him taller than their ridiculous rules permit." Jack erupted with a triumphant war cry that echoed down the entire cul-de-sac, startling a flock of starlings into flight against the darkening sky. We toiled until our fingers grew numb and the streetlights flickered to life. The base alone surpassed the width of our pickup truck's tires and was as heavy as sin. I heaved it onto the stump, where it settled with a deep, gratifying crunch, perfectly secured by the hidden roots below. From the garage, I retrieved everything I had been saving for a future project: scrap rebar, steel mesh from a previous fence installation, and even the bent mower blade that had endured 3 seasons of Bermuda grass and one unfortunate encounter with a sprinkler head. Jack watched, his eyes wide with wonder as I fashioned an invisible skeleton of metal deep within the snow. "It's not cheating," I assured him, a wink accompanying the sting of cold on my cheeks. "It's about structural integrity. Sarge is going to stand tall until spring, whether Karen approves or not." Jack's response was immediate and utterly fitting. "We're building a snowmech, Dad. A full-blown frost giant with a titanium spine and absolutely zero respect for HOA presidents." By the time we concluded our work, the temperature had plummeted drastically, and the sky above had transformed into a deep indigo bowl studded with countless stars. We adorned our creation with coal scavenged from last summer's barbecue, a crimson scarf that had once been part of my ceremonial army uniform, and 2 black bottle caps that gleamed like polished obsidian under the streetlights. Carrots were frozen solid in the crisper drawer, so Jack insisted on using a slightly sad-looking banana we unearthed from the bottom of the fruit bowl. It curved upwards in a perpetually sarcastic smirk. Beneath the sodium orange glow of the street lamp, our frost giant stood at least 7 feet tall, perhaps 7.5, if one accounted for the peaked cap Jack had jauntily jammed onto its head. Its shadow stretched across the entire cul-de-sac and halfway up the Hendersons' garage door. There was an undeniable air of vigilance about him. His scarf fluttered like a banner, his bottle cap eyes reflected passing headlights, and his posture was straighter and prouder than any snowman had a right to be. Jack stepped back, mittens planted on his hips, surveying our masterpiece with the discerning eye of a general reviewing his troops. "What shall we call him?" I inquired, my voice low, tinged with what felt suspiciously like awe. Jack didn't even flinch. "Sarge," he declared, "because he looks like he's already been through the trenches and is daring the world to try him again." I laughed so heartily that my ribs ached and the cold burned all the way to my lungs. Sarge, it was. Later, after Jack had finally succumbed to exhaustion, still fully dressed except for his boots, sprawled across his bed and clutching a plastic army man, I poured myself a mug of cocoa, enhanced with a generous splash of bourbon, and settled by the front window. Outside, the snow continued its silent descent, each flake catching the streetlight for a fleeting moment before vanishing into the accumulating drifts. And there stood Sarge, motionless, unapologetic, a sentinel forged from childhood exuberance and adult defiance. I raised my mug in a silent salute. "Welcome to the watch, soldier." Little did I realize the adversary was already calculating trajectories in the darkness. The initial official declaration of hostilities arrived at precisely 7:12 the following morning, discreetly slipped into our mailbox like a perfumed threat. No envelope, no stamp, just a single sheet of heavy ivory cardstock folded with meticulous precision. The letterhead was embossed in opulent gold foil, Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. The text was rendered in a cold, flawless 12-point Times New Roman font, the typeface favored by bureaucrats and divorce attorneys. Notice of violation, Regulation 7.14c. Seasonal decorations exceeding 48 inches in vertical height necessitate written pre-approval from the board. Your unauthorized structure currently measures approximately 84 to 87 inches, depending on snow accumulation. Immediate removal is mandated within 48 hours. Failure to comply will result in daily fines of $50 and potential referral to the Compliance Subcommittee. Karen Stapleton, President, Maple Ridge HOA. I read it 3 times, the steam from my coffee curling around the stark words like vengeful specters. Then I erupted in laughter, so hearty that the mug nearly slipped from my frigid fingers. Jack skidded into the kitchen on his sock-covered feet, his hair sticking up as if he had experienced an electrical shock. "What's so amusing?" he inquired. I handed him the letter. He read it slowly, his lips moving silently, then looked up with the pure, unadulterated indignation only a 10-year-old can muster. "She measured him," he exclaimed, his voice cracking on the final word. "At night, in the snow, with a tape measure." "She possesses commitment," I remarked, wiping a tear from my eye, "and a headlamp, apparently." Jack marched directly to the front window, pressed both palms and his nose against the glass, and bellowed, loud enough to make the panes rattle, "Sarge is taller than your soul, Karen." Mrs. Delgado across the street peeked through her curtains and offered us an approving thumbs up. I affixed the notice to the refrigerator with the bald eagle magnet, positioned right next to Jack's most recent report card. 3 A's, 1 B- in penmanship, and a teacher's comment that read, "Jack has strong opinions and stronger volume." Jack immediately added his own artistic contribution, a crayon masterpiece depicting Sarge stomping on a miniature navy blue SUV while Karen fled in fuzzy pink slippers, tears streaming beneath the title, scrawled in purple marker, "Property of the United States of Jack and Sarge." Word travels faster than salt trucks through Maple Ridge. By noon the following day, fresh snow had fallen once more, wet, heavy, and perfectly conducive to packing. And the neighborhood children materialized as if summoned by some ancient snowball covenant. They arrived with phones held aloft, scarves flapping, parents trailing behind, feigning disinterest in the proceedings. Someone bestowed an old army patrol cap upon Sergeant's head at a jaunty angle. Another youngster produced a second scarf, a vibrant Gryffindor red, and wrapped it around him like a victory sash. Jack seized a thick black Sharpie and meticulously drew a row of campaign ribbons across the snowy chest, tiny hearts signifying bravery, lightning bolts for surviving Karen's wrath. Every selfie snapped, every triumphant whoop, every snowball launched from behind Sarge's imposing form felt like a defiant middle finger concealed within mittens, and Karen was observing. I first spotted her on Tuesday afternoon. I was engaged in salting the walkway, the crystalline chemicals hissing against the ice, when her navy blue Lincoln Navigator casually traversed the cul-de-sac at precisely 8 miles per hour. Its engine idled, its wipers flicked lazily, and heat shimmered off its hood. She offered no wave, no reduction in speed, simply stared straight ahead at Sarge as if he were a personal affront sculpted in ice. For a full 5 minutes she remained there, a dark silhouette behind tinted glass, her breath fogging the windshield in slow, deliberate puffs. Then, The SUV reversed with mechanical grace and vanished around the corner. That evening, after the streetlights buzzed to life and the temperature dropped precipitously, making the snow squeak underfoot, I discovered the evidence. A perfect circle of boot prints surrounding Sarge. Narrow, expensive tread, Italian leather, likely the kind that commands a higher price per square inch than my mortgage payment. The prints were pressed deeply, as if their owner had stood in one spot for an extended duration, slowly pivoting, scrutinizing every angle. One set of prints terminated directly in front of Sarge's banana nose, close enough that whoever it belonged to could have reached out and touched him. Jack knelt beside the tracks, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Reconnaissance mission," he whispered, his tone deadly serious. "She's casing the joint." I knelt beside him, the cold seeping through my jeans. "Let her case," I replied. "She still doesn't grasp it." "Grasp what?" I pointed to the ground beneath Sarge's base, where the snow had been compacted so tightly it gleamed like polished marble. "He's not just standing on Old Thunder, buddy. He is Old Thunder. The roots extend 20 feet in every direction. You'd need a backhoe and a court order to relocate him now." Jack's grin could have illuminated the entire block. "So basically, we constructed a fortress and christened it a Snowman." Precisely. We high-fived, our mittens smacking together with a muffled thud that echoed down the deserted street. Inside, I poured 2 mugs of cocoa with extra marshmallows for morale, and we sat at the kitchen table, sketching battle plans on the reverse side of Karen's violation notice. Jack was eager to incorporate a carrot-based machine gun turret. I proposed reinforcing the midsection with the old satellite dish I had been intending to recycle. We ultimately agreed on both. Later, long after Jack had fallen asleep, dreaming of frost giants and victory parades, I returned to the window. The street was silent, save for the soft creak of ice expanding in the gutters. Sarge stood beneath the street lamp like a solitary sentry on night watch, his scarf fluttering in the faint breeze, his bottle cap eyes reflecting the moonlight like twin silver coins. I pressed my palm to the cold glass and felt the house settle around me, solid, warm, and undeniably ours. Karen could measure to her heart's content. She could circle and glare and pen her petty letters until her perfectly manicured fingers bled ink. But some things, some individuals, some sons, some obstinate ancient oaks, and one particularly remarkable 7-foot frost giant simply refused to yield, and winter had only just begun. 2 days after the initial notice, precisely on the morning of December 10th, a date I now recall, with the same vividness soldiers remember the instant they first heard incoming rounds, the second letter arrived. This one was enclosed in an actual envelope crafted from heavy linen stock and hand-delivered while Jack and I were enjoying breakfast. I heard the soft slap of paper against the welcome mat, the faint crunch of expensive boots retreating down the salted steps, and I knew even before I opened the door. The envelope was sealed with a gold foil sticker shaped like the Maple Ridge logo, a stylized maple leaf adorned with a crown, because of course it was. Inside, the tone had shifted from courteous hostility to barely concealed fury. Second notice escalated. "Dear Mr. James Carter, despite the previous directive issued on December 8th, the unauthorized seasonal structure on your property remains in place. Current height now exceeds 92 inches, including recent additions of non-regulation scarves and headwear. Furthermore, close inspection has revealed the presence of non-decorative internal materials, specifically metal rebar and mesh, and what appears to be a lawnmower blade, creating an unapproved load-bearing construct that may constitute a liability hazard. Effective immediately, you are assessed a $150 fine accruing weekly until full removal and restoration of the lawn to its pre-storm condition. Failure to comply by December 14th will result in referral to the Compliance Subcommittee and potential legal remediation through the association's retained counsel. This is your final courtesy notification. Sincerely, Karen Stapleton, President, Maple Ridge Homeowners Association." I read it aloud at the table. Jack's spoon froze halfway to his mouth, Cocoa Puffs bobbing like tiny brown life rafts. She called Sarge a liability hazard, he whispered, as if the words themselves were cursed. She called him a lot of things, I replied, folding the letter with deliberate slowness. None of them friendly. Jack's eyes narrowed. She's scared of him. Terrified, I agreed, because the phrase that had snagged in my mind like barbed wire was non-decorative internal materials. Karen hadn't merely measured from the street this time. She had ventured close enough to discern the faint glint of rebar beneath the fresh powder we had packed on the previous day. She had stood there in her designer coat, her breath creating clouds in the frigid air, her phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness, cataloging every perceived infraction like a general mapping enemy fortifications. I turned toward the window. Sarge stood proudly beneath a light dusting of new snow, his scarves fluttering like regimental colors, his banana nose curved in that perpetual smirk. Sunlight caught his bottle-cap eyes, casting twin sparks across the yard. He looked, and there is truly no other word for it, heroic. Jack was already sketching again. This time, Sarge sported a cape fashioned from caution tape and wielded a shield shaped like Karen's violation notice. "Do we have to take him down?" he asked, his voice sounding small for the first time. I crouched down to be at his eye level. "Listen to me, buddy. Sarge is staying precisely where he is until the spring thaw personally requests his departure, and even then, I'm quite sure he'll tell spring to get lost." Jack's grin returned with full force. "Attaboy, Dad." That night, the temperature plummeted to 12 degrees Fahrenheit, the kind of biting cold that makes your teeth ache and transforms every exhaled breath into a plume of dragon's fire. I waited until Jack was asleep, then donned every thermal layer I possessed, Carhartt overalls, 2 hoodies, and the balaclava Clara had purchased for me the year we attempted ice fishing and vowed never to repeat the experience. I carried a headlamp, a cordless drill with a fully charged battery, a 5-gallon bucket of quick-set epoxy, and every remaining length of rebar from the garage. The plan was not intended as a weapon, never that. But I was finished feigning fragility for Sarge. Working under the dim red glow of the headlamp, so as not to awaken the entire street, I drilled fresh holes directly through the compacted snow and into the very core of Old Thunder. Each length of rebar slid home with a satisfying metallic thunk, akin to bolts locking into a rifle mechanism. I poured epoxy into every void, observing it foam and harden almost instantaneously in the frigid air. Then I wove steel mesh across the shoulders and chest, bending it with my gloved hands until it vanished beneath a final, thick layer of snow that Jack and I would pack on in the morning. When I stepped back, sweat freezing on my eyebrows, Sarge appeared precisely the same from the street, cheerful, somewhat ridiculous, and utterly harmless, but internally he was now a fortress concealed within a jest. As I packed away my tools, headlights swept across the yard, slow, deliberate, and all too familiar. It was Karen's navigator again. This time, she didn't even bother to feign driving past. She stopped directly in front of our house, her engine idling, her high beams cutting through the darkness like searchlights. For a full 30 seconds, the intense light bathed Sarge in a harsh white glare, transforming every snow crystal into diamond dust. I stood in the open garage doorway, arms crossed, and stared directly into the blinding light. The high beams abruptly extinguished. The SUV reversed, its tires crunching on the frozen ground, and disappeared. The message had been received by both parties. Back inside, I poured a finger of bourbon, no cocoa this time, and opened the red folder I kept in the bottom drawer of my desk. Within its confines lay 5 years of Karen's most egregious offenses. The certified letter regarding the window air conditioning unit during a heat index of 108 degrees. The citation for gross height meticulously measured to the quarter inch. The passive-aggressive forum post lamenting certain residents who seemed to believe rules were merely optional suggestions. I added the new letter, punched a hole through it with a satisfying display of force, and slid it behind its predecessors. Then I opened my laptop and accessed the live feed from the 4 security cameras I had installed after the 3rd anonymous complaint about my truck being parked overnight. One camera provided a direct view of Sarge. I rewound to 2:14 a.m. the previous night. And there she was, Karen, bundled in a long camel coat, her fur-lined hood pulled up, her flashlight beam dancing across Sarge's midsection. She meticulously circled him, her measuring device unspooling like a serpent's darting tongue. At one juncture, she paused, her head cocked. "And I assure you, this is entirely truthful," she smirked. It was a small, intimate, victorious grin, as if she had finally pinpointed the vulnerability she'd been relentlessly pursuing. Her gaze shot directly toward the garage security camera. She lifted a gloved hand and offered a wave. It was a calculated, contemptuous flick of her fingers. Then she departed, her boots imprinting pristine crescents into the freshly fallen snow. I replayed the sequence 3 times, my heart pounding against my ribs like artillery fire from an approaching barrage. This had transcended mere decorative embellishment. This was a personal affront, and for the first time since Clara's passing, a fire hotter than my sorrow ignited within my chest. Karen harbored the delusion that she was provoking a weary single father who simply desired solitude. She had absolutely no inkling that she had provoked a seasoned combatant, one who had dedicated years to mastering the art of fortifying a position and concealing its formidable strength until it was far too late for her to react. I shut the laptop, drained the remnants of my bourbon, and cast my gaze toward Sarge, standing sentinel beneath the luminescence of the street lamp. Sleep could indisputably wait. Tomorrow, we would augment his form with the satellite dish, and the night that followed that, well, winter had a protracted lifespan, and Sarge had only just commenced his resistance. The Thursday evening gathering of the Homeowners Association was convened within the clubhouse, an environment perpetually permeated by the scent of lemon-scented disinfectant, scorched coffee, and the subdued despair of individuals with no more engaging pursuits at 7 o'clock on a weekday evening. I had not set foot within that edifice for nearly 2 years. Not since they attempted to enact a regulation mandating twin matching porch chairs, a decree that would have nullified the Adirondack chair Clara had vibrantly adorned with turquoise paint the summer prior to her becoming ill. Tonight, however, I strode through those glass portals as if transgressing a boundary. I had been silently challenging someone to delineate such a line for the better part of 5 years. Jack insisted on accompanying me. He sported his Team Sarge hoodie, the very garment his elder sister had screen-printed after their initial casual photographs went viral within the 4th grade group chat, and he carried a spiral-bound notebook emblazoned with top-secret battle plans in bold red marker. He marched by my side like a diminutive instigator, his boots clomping rhythmically on the tiled floor, his chin held defiantly high. The room was already half occupied. Folding chairs were arranged in precise rows, overhead fluorescent lights hummed with a low drone, and a long table stood at the forefront, draped in white plastic, resembling a budget wedding reception. Karen occupied the central position, resplendent in her winter white blazer, her lips painted a precise shade of arterial crimson. Her posture was so rigidly upright it appeared to inflict pain. The remainder of the board members flanked her, exhibiting the timidity of nervous subordinates. Howard with his perennial cardigan, Rosa, the new member, barely 30 and already exhibiting signs of profound exhaustion, and 2 others whose names I never bothered to commit to memory, as they only vocalized when Karen prompted them to breathe. I selected a seat in the rear row, with Jack to my left and an empty chair to my right that no one dared to occupy. The atmosphere was heavy with the smell of burnt paper and barely suppressed fury. Karen commenced with the customary treasurer's report for the pageant, the renewal of the snowplow contract, an incident involving a resident's canine depositing waste on the communal grounds once more. Each word was delivered with a practiced saccharine cadence designed to evoke a craving for a blood sugar check. She then cleared her throat, a maneuver people employ when poised to deliver a bombshell, and then feign it as harmless confetti. "I would like to introduce a special agenda item," she announced, sliding a single glossy photograph across the table. It depicted Sarge, rendered in unforgiving high definition, the satellite dish now distinctly visible beneath his scarf, resembling a protective chest plate. "A resident," she continued, her voice gaining a steely edge, has erected an unauthorized, reinforced seasonal structure exceeding 96 inches in height, incorporating prohibited metal components and positioned directly atop a previously identified hazard stump. This is no longer mere decoration. It represents a deliberate safety risk and an aesthetic affront to the entire community. She omitted my name. It was entirely unnecessary. 20 heads swiveled in perfect, synchronized unison. Jack leaned closer and whispered, his voice carrying clearly to the row in front of us. She said, "Affront. That's a fancy word for butt hurt." A few individuals coughed, suppressing their amusement as coffee nearly escaped their lips. Karen's eyes narrowed, locking onto mine, their gaze frigid and glittering. Would the resident in question care to offer an explanation? I raised my hand, much like a child requesting permission to use the restroom, a slow, deliberate motion. "Since you're addressing my front yard," I began. "Yeah, I have a couple of questions." Karen's smile possessed the power to freeze molten lava. "Proceed, Mr. Carter." "Has anyone," I inquired, my voice resonating through the room, "anyone at all been injured by the snowman?" Silence descended. "Any property damage? Any insurance claims? Any child traumatized by a rogue banana nose?" A scattering of muffled chuckles rippled through the back rows. Karen's jaw twitched. "Safety concerns," she retorted, her voice tight. "We must not await tragedy, Mr. Carter." "Funny," I said, rising to my feet, my boots echoing on the tile. "I seem to recall your nephew performing donuts in the cul-de-sac last 4th of July on his dirt bike. He nearly struck Mrs. Delgado's mailbox and my son. That I considered a safety issue. Didn't see a violation notice for that." Gasps swept through the room. Someone dropped a pen. "Or your husband's company van parked on the street for 4 consecutive days last August. Commercial vehicles are prohibited, correct? It's amusing how certain rules seem to flex when family is involved." Howard shifted uncomfortably. Rosa's eyebrows ascended towards her hairline. "This is not about personal vendettas," Karen snapped, her voice cracking like thin ice. "No," I countered, stepping into the aisle, my boots resonating on the tile. "This is about selective enforcement. This is about a president who intrudes upon private property with a measuring tape at 2 in the morning, who targets a widower for a window air conditioning unit during a heat advisory, because, God forbid, someone might glimpse a bit of white plastic from the street. This is about a woman who believes authority derives from a clipboard and a printer, not from neighbors treating each other with basic human dignity." I fixed my gaze directly upon the board. "I possess 5 years of correspondence, photographs, and now video evidence of your president circling my yard like a predator. If this board deems it necessary to penalize me for a snowman that has safeguarded more bumpers than your entire hazard marker budget, then by all means proceed. I will escalate this matter to the city, to the media, to every homeowner who has ever hesitated to plant tomatoes for fear of Karen's scrutiny, and I will bring irrefutable proof." I retrieved my phone, my thumb poised over the play button. "Would you care to witness her waving at my security camera at 2:14 in the morning? I would be delighted to project it right up there on the screen." Rosa leaned forward. "I would like to review that footage before any vote is taken." Howard nodded slowly, seconding the motion. Karen's face contorted, paling to the color of spoiled milk. She slammed her folder shut with such force that the table jolted. "We will table this item," she hissed, her voice laced with venom. "Moving on." But the damage had been inflicted. Murmurs spread through the assembly, phones illuminated beneath chairs, and furtive glances darted between myself and the suddenly diminished figure at the front. A gentleman with whom I had never exchanged a word in 5 years offered a subtle fist bump as I resumed my seat. Jack looked up at me, his eyes gleaming as if I had just secured victory in the Super Bowl. "You crushed it, Dad," he whispered. I ruffled his hair, experiencing a release within my chest that I hadn't consciously recognized as being constricted. Outside, the temperature had plummeted once more, the wind whipping stray snowflakes into miniature cyclones across the parking lot. Jack and I commenced our trek home beneath a sky so brilliantly clear that the stars appeared within reach. Sarge was awaiting our arrival, his scarves snapping like battle flags, and his satellite dish chest plate caught the moonlight with a subdued metallic sheen. Jack rendered him a salute. I did likewise, for in years the frost giant was no longer the solitary entity standing tall, and somewhere across the cul-de-sac, behind curtains that now felt significantly more permeable, Karen was beginning to comprehend the sensation of the ground shifting beneath her immaculately manicured boots. Winter had only just begun, and we were prepared. Karen Stapleton had not always been the self-proclaimed Empress of Maple Ridge. 5 years prior, when she and her husband Mark initially relocated, she was simply the new neighbor with the gleaming red barbecue grill, the matching patio furniture set that likely cost more than my truck, and a smile that still retained a significant degree of wattage. She brought homemade oatmeal raisin cookies to the welcome barbecue, slightly overbaked, but the gesture was appreciated. She posed polite inquiries about Jack's schooling, complimented Clara's vibrant wildflower garden, and even chuckled when Jack attempted to sell her a half-melted popsicle for $1. The facade began to erode gradually. It commenced with minor, almost forgivable transgressions. A handwritten note affixed to my windshield because my refuse bins were visible for 37 minutes past the 8 a.m. pickup. A remark at the community yard sale suggesting my garage door appeared somewhat weary from conflict. I dismissed it. Life is far too fleeting for disputes over recycling schedules, but Karen does not collect opinions in the conventional sense. She stockpiles them like ordnance. Once she successfully secured a position on the board, her campaign fueled by complimentary cupcakes from the upscale downtown bakery and glossy flyers that inexplicably materialized in every mailbox, the metamorphosis was swift and surgically precise. My lawn was suddenly deemed inconsistent with curb appeal standards if it dared to grow a quarter of an inch beyond the prescribed regulation. Jack's portable soccer goal was reclassified as a visual impediment and a tripping hazard. When I repainted the shed, the identical neutral tan shade present on the approved color palette, she flagged it because I had utilized the nomenclature desert clay instead of sandy dust. The identical hexadecimal color code, a different marketing designation. She demanded a complete repainting nonetheless. The board rubber-stamped her every directive. Then ensued the summer of the air conditioning conflict. Our central unit succumbed during a severe heat wave. The temperature registered 108 degrees in the shade, with humidity so oppressive it felt palpable. Jack, aged 8, his cheeks flushed, tossed and turned in a bedroom that resembled the interior of a pizza oven. I retrieved the antiquated window unit from the garage, unsightly and noisy but functional, and wedged it into his bedroom window. It protruded 8 inches and vibrated like a diesel truck, yet it managed to lower the room temperature to a tolerable 78 degrees. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived. Immediate violation. Unauthorized window-mounted appliance visible from the street. Daily fines will commence accruing at midnight. This communication was dispatched during an official heat advisory. No compassion, no exception, no humanity, merely rules. I removed the unit at 11:47 p.m. Not out of concern for the fine, but because Jack began to cry, fearing the HOA would confiscate our home. 8 years old and terrified of a homeowners association, allow that sentiment to settle within your conscience for a moment. I meticulously retained every subsequent letter, every passive-aggressive post on the online forum. Certain residents, one particular missive read, seemed to perceive regulations as mere suggestions. Every photograph of her crouching in my grass, ruler in hand, like a deranged groundskeeper. The crimson folder in my desk drawer grew progressively fatter and heavier, a paper testament to 5 years of insidious harassment. I was not the sole target, merely the individual who refused to capitulate. Mr. Elkins, the retired history instructor residing on Birch Lane, was fined $200 for 5 tomato plants housed in raised beds. No agricultural activity permitted. The Nuance family received 3 separate warnings regarding their wind chimes being audibly disruptive. One could barely discern them over the gentle hum of Karen's own water fountain. Julia on Alder Lane erected an inflatable reindeer for her son's 7th birthday celebration. Not for Christmas, but on a random Tuesday in July, simply because the child adored reindeer. Karen had it cited for excessive visual clutter within 6 hours. She governed through fear and photocopies, and the reason for her profound animosity towards me was remarkably simple. I never offered an apology. I never attended her wine and brie gatherings. I never feigned that her opinions held greater significance than my son's laughter, or the enduring resurgence of wildflowers each spring in Clara's garden. Even though Karen consistently voted to eradicate them in the pursuit of uniformity, independence in Karen's worldview represented the ultimate transgression. Therefore, when she set her sights on Sarge, it was not about a snowman. It was the climactic confrontation in a 5-year siege. Only this time, her calculations had been catastrophically flawed. She believed she was confronting a whimsical, temporary lawn ornament constructed by a grieving father and a 10-year-old with a savior complex. She had no comprehension that she was initiating hostilities against a fortified structure disguised as a jest. Anchored to the very lightning-scarred stump she had once attempted to penalize me for marking, reinforced with every iota of stubbornness I had accumulated since the day I carried Clara's casket. That evening, following the meeting, where her own board members flinched at the mere mention of my video evidence, I remained in the garage long after Jack had fallen asleep. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed, casting stark shadows across the concrete floor. I opened the crimson folder one final time, spreading its contents across the workbench like exhibits in a war crimes tribunal. Then, I undertook an action I had not performed since my deployment in Kandahar. I meticulously planned, not for vengeance, never for that, but for accountability. I retrieved every remaining piece of heavy scrap metal from the rafters, the fractured satellite dish, 2 discarded brake rotors from the Tacoma I had dismantled the previous spring, and the rusted lawnmower deck weighing a substantial 80 pounds. I arranged them meticulously, like protective armor plating. Tomorrow, the blizzard was scheduled to arrive. 40-mile-per-hour winds, 0 visibility conditions, sub-zero temperatures. The forecast scrolled across my phone in aggressive red banners. High impact, winter storm, do not travel. Perfect. I surveyed the security camera monitor. Sarge stood solitary in the darkness, his scarves whipping, his banana nose frozen in that perpetual insolent smirk. "Hold the line, soldier," I whispered, because Karen wasn't finished, and neither were we. Outside, the first substantial snowflakes of the impending apocalypse began to descend, lazily and silently, already obliterating the footprints she had left the preceding night. By morning, the world would be rendered white, pristine, and unforgiving, and Sarge would be prepared. The eve of the blizzard saw the garage radiating light like a forward operating base under red alert. Jack and I stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the harsh glare of the fluorescent lights. Both of us were bundled so thickly we resembled mismatched marshmallows. The radio in the corner crackled with transmissions from the National Weather Service, repeating the same 4 words in an incessant loop: life-threatening wind chill. Outside, the wind had already commenced its low, hungry moan through the eaves, rattling the gutters like distant artillery fire. Jack's eyes were wide behind the fog of his breath. "This is the big one, isn't it?" "Bigger than last year," I replied, pulling the final top off the pile of metal. "They're calling it a bomb cyclone. 45-mile-per-hour gusts, 2 feet of snow, -20 wind chill. The roads will be impassable by dawn." Jack nodded solemnly, with the gravitas only a 10-year-old who has consumed an excessive number of war documentaries can muster. "Then Sarge needs his full battle rattle." We equipped him with precisely that. First, the spine. A 6-foot length of 1-inch galvanized pipe I had salvaged from a commercial job 2 years prior. I drilled directly through the packed snow and into the heartwood of Old Thunder until the pipe seated with a dull, metallic thud that resonated deep within my bones. Jack held it perfectly vertical while I secured 4 stainless steel bolts, each the size of railroad spikes. The pipe vanished completely beneath the fresh powder, but it transformed Sarge from a snowman into a flagpole firmly anchored in bedrock. Next, the rib cage. We fashioned 2 heavy steel mesh sections into overlapping X patterns across his shoulders and torso, bending them while cold with gloved hands and a 4-pound sledgehammer. Each strike echoed like church bells in the frigid air. Jack fed me zip ties, thick enough to moor a ship. I cinched them until the mesh bit deep and disappeared beneath another thick layer of snow, which we sculpted smooth with mittens and pure resolve. The lawnmower deck, 80 pounds of rusted iron, was positioned at the base like a buried landmine. Jack and I hoisted it up together, grunting and laughing when it nearly crushed my toe. We wedged it directly against the stump's root flare, then packed snow around it until the ground appeared undisturbed. Jack disappeared into the scrap bin and reappeared, dragging 2 brake rotors like oversized metal discs. "These go right here," he declared, slapping Sargent's midsection. "Iron Man plating." We nestled them side by side, his scarf draped over the top, so that only a faint metallic glint was visible when the light struck them at just the right angle. Last came the pièce de résistance, the cracked 16-inch satellite dish I had rescued from a curbside in 2019. I bent the mounting arm until it curved forward like a Roman breastplate, then concealed it beneath the scarves. From 10 feet away, it merely appeared as if Sarge had puffed out his chest with pride. Up close, it was a 70-pound steel shield poised for impact. We labored past 10 o'clock, past 11, beyond the point where our fingers became numb and then reawakened. The garage door remained ajar to the night so we could continuously pack fresh snow the instant the wind delivered it. Every scoop we added felt like an additional layer of armor, another silent promise. You will not falter. At one point, Jack paused, his headlamp beam cutting through the swirling flakes, and looked up at me with absolute earnestness. "Dad, is this too much?" I knelt in the snow, bringing us eye to eye, the wind howling around us like a sentient entity. "Jack, listen, there is no such thing as too much when you are defending something that holds meaning. Sarge isn't just a snowman anymore. He represents every instant someone tried to diminish us. He embodies every letter, every fine. Every night I lay awake fearing the next knock on the door would be about you. He is your mother's laughter echoing in the midst of a snowstorm. He is us." Jack's eyes welled with tears, but he blinked them back resolutely and nodded once, a sharp, soldierly gesture. "Then he needs a shield," he stated. I handed him the bent coat hanger Rosa had delivered earlier. Together, we shaped it into a crude arm and affixed it so that Sargent's right mitten appeared to be holding a rectangular piece of plywood we had painted with leftover deck stain, a small white sign bearing Jack's careful block lettering, "Maple Ridge. Stand tall or don't stand at all." When we finally stepped back, sometime after midnight, the transformation was complete. From the street, he still resembled the world's most patriotic snowman. Scarves whipping, banana nose askew in that eternal smirk, bottle cap eyes reflecting the garage floodlight like twin silver coins. But if one knew precisely where to look, and only if one possessed that knowledge, the subtle forward posture of a warrior bracing for impact, the faint outline of steel beneath the snow, the manner in which the entire structure now seemed irrevocably rooted to the planet itself, would be discernible. Jack tugged his scarf higher over his nose and grinned through the knit fabric. "People are going to think we're insane." "They already do," I replied. He laughed, the sound bright and sharp against the roar of the approaching storm, and we high-fived with mittens that left a perfect puff of snow suspended in the air between us. Indoors, we peeled off layers in the mudroom, leaving a small mountain of damp outerwear and a trail of snowy footprints that would undoubtedly infuriate Karen if she ever witnessed them. Jack succumbed to sleep on the couch before I had even finished preparing the hot chocolate, still clutching the plastic army man he had carried all night like a protective talisman. I carried him to his bed, tucked him in, and stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to the wind shriek across the roof. Then I moved to the living room window and gazed outward. The initial bands of the blizzard had already arrived. Snow whipped sideways in sheets thick enough to swallow headlights whole. The street lamp flickered once, then twice, before steadying, projecting a cone of orange light that barely penetrated the edge of the yard. And there, amidst the tempest, Sarge stood motionless, an icy colossus, daring the storm to unleash its full fury. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and whispered the words I had not articulated aloud since Clara's funeral. "We've got this." Then I poured one last measure of bourbon, raised my glass toward the window, and offered a toast to the frost giant standing watch over my son's dreams. Tomorrow, the world would turn white and ferocious. Tomorrow, Karen would make her move. But tonight, we had constructed something indomitable, and the storm could commence. The blizzard struck at 7 minutes past midnight. It was as if the sky had fractured and decided to inter us alive. I awoke to the house groaning under the assault of the wind, roof trusses creaking, windows rattling in their frames. The ancient oak in the backyard thrashed as if it were attempting to tear itself free and flee. The electricity sputtered twice, then stabilized, bathing the bedroom in the dim, pallid, yellow light of the emergency night lamp that Jack, despite everything, refused to acknowledge his need for. I donned every garment I possessed and crept downstairs, my steps muffled by socks so thick they felt like slippers. The surveillance display on the kitchen counter indicated that all 4 cameras were still operational, their feeds wavering in the tempest. Camera 1, covering the front yard, offered little more than a blurry, white void where the street should have been, completely obscured by the gale. However, at the heart of the tempest, bathed in the steady beam of the solitary street lamp that defied the storm, stood Sarge, perfectly framed. Snow, driven horizontally, lashed across his chest in dense sheets. Yet he remained resolute, unyielding. The protective shield on the satellite dish glinted with brief metallic flashes reminiscent of a knight brandishing steel amidst a cavalry charge. Jack emerged at the summit of the stairs, clad in dinosaur-patterned pajamas and my old army physical training hoodie, which descended to his knees. His hair stood on end in a disarray of directions. "Is he still there?" he inquired in a hushed tone, his voice barely audible against the tempest's roar. "Go see," I directed, gesturing towards the monitor. He scrambled down, pressed his face close to the screen, and uttered a sigh of pure awe. The street lamp had become encased in ice, transforming its illumination into a soft, amber halo. Sarge was positioned within this ethereal glow, appearing like a spectral figure sculpted from diamond dust and scarves, rigidly immobile and facing directly east. The small plywood shield affixed to his arm rattled but held firm. "He looks like he's radiating light," Jack breathed. "That's what happens when you refuse to surrender," I explained. We positioned 2 kitchen chairs before the monitor and settled in, resembling children on Christmas Eve, observing the storm's futile attempts to displace our frost giant. The wind shrieked at 60 miles per hour, with gusts reaching even higher. The anemometer on the roof wailed like a distressed jet engine. Yet Sarge remained firmly anchored to the earth, an unmoving constant in a world consumed by chaos. At 2:14 in the morning, precisely. Headlights pierced the blinding white. 2 pale beams sliced through the darkness from the northern extremity of the cul-de-sac. The feed momentarily flickered, then stabilized, revealing her presence. Karen's navy blue Lincoln Navigator advanced at a pedestrian pace, its tires crunching over the freshly fallen snow with a sound akin to breaking bones. It halted directly in front of our residence. The engine idled, its exhaust plume whipped sideways by the wind and instantly dissipated. Jack's hand sought mine, its grip tightening. "What is she doing?" he whispered. I offered no response. I couldn't. My pulse throbbed in my ears with a ferocity exceeding the wind's fury. The driver's side window lowered with a mechanical whine barely discernible above the storm's din. A gloved hand emerged, holding a mobile phone. The screen's bluish-white luminescence illuminated Karen's face for 3 full seconds. Her eyes, pale and taut, were wide and unblinking. She fixated on Sarge, then on the camera she knew was observing, and finally back to Sarge. 30 seconds elapsed, then a full minute. 3 minutes of nothing but wind, headlights, and the low rumble of a V8 engine that had no business operating in such conditions. Jack's grip intensified to the point of pain. "Dad, I see it." Finally, The window ascended. The SUV remained stationary for another 30 seconds, gently rocking in the gusts. Then it reversed, slowly and deliberately, until its taillights vanished into the swirling white curtain. She never exited the vehicle. She never even blinked. She merely observed, assessed, and planned. I replayed the footage twice, my heart hammering with such intensity that I felt it reverberating in my teeth. Karen had not arrived to issue a threat or to gloat. She had come to meticulously record the angle, the distance, the precise trajectory from the crest of the hill to the base of our frost giant. She was calculating the force of impact. Jack's voice was a mere exhalation. "She's going to try to topple him." I drew him closer, feeling his small body tremble against mine. It wasn't from the cold, but from the same righteous anger that had consumed me for 5 years. "Let her try," I declared. Because beneath that cheerful facade of snow, scarves, and a crooked banana nose lay 80 pounds of lawnmower deck, 2 brake routers, a satellite shield, and a central support fashioned from galvanized pipe, all firmly anchored to a tree stump that had withstood lightning, drought, and every bureaucratic tantrum Karen could conceive. Sarge was not merely fortified, he was vengeance adorned with a festive scarf. We remained fixated on the monitor until the sky outside adopted the muted hue of dishwater and the wind finally began to subside. At some point, Jack succumbed to sleep, resting against my shoulder, his breath warm on my neck. I carried him to his bed, tucked the blankets in snugly, and stood in the hallway, listening to the storm exhaust itself against the house. Before descending once more, I paused at the window for a final observation. The blizzard had unleashed its full fury. 2 feet of fresh snow had drifted, sculpted into sharp, wave-like crests. Every footprint from the preceding night had been obliterated, as if they had never existed. And at the epicenter of it all, unblemished and unbowed, stood Commander Sarge, his scarves transformed into frozen wings. His shielded arm remained raised in an eternal salute, his banana nose curved in a triumphant grin that seemed to proclaim, "Bring it on." I pressed my forehead against the frigid glass, whispering the promise I had made to Clara the night she implored me to preserve Jack's capacity for wonder. "Not tonight, my darling. Not ever." I then poured the last of the bourbon, raised the glass to the watchful frost giant, and awaited the dawn. Because somewhere out there, in the profound silence of the white expanse, Karen was revving her engine, and when she arrived, she would discover the consequences of driving 2 tons of entitlement directly into 5 winters' worth of quiet, unyielding defiance. Let the snow fall. The morning following the blizzard dawned cold, brilliantly clear, and devastatingly beautiful. The world had been scoured clean and sharpened to a razor's edge. Every tree branch was adorned with a sheath of ice, so thick it chimed like glass when brushed by the wind. The streets had effectively vanished, replaced by smooth white expanses, interrupted only by the occasional submerged mailbox or partially swallowed vehicle. The sun hung low and unforgiving, transforming every surface into a blinding mirror. I was on my 3rd cup of coffee, standing at the kitchen window, clad only in long johns and wool socks, when the surveillance monitor registered motion at precisely 8:47 in the morning. Karen's Lincoln Navigator appeared at the crest of the hill, resembling a shark fin slicing through the powder. It paused there for a full 10 seconds, the engine idling, its exhaust curling upwards in languid spirals that the wind immediately tore asunder. From the overhead camera's perspective, the vehicle appeared minuscule against the vast white landscape, yet I could feel the palpable intent radiating from the screen in waves. Jack came thundering down the stairs, still in his dinosaur pajamas, his hair attempting a spirited imitation of a dandelion puff. Is it her? It's her. We watched in absolute silence as the SUV eased forward, its tires hissing over the packed snow, steadily gaining momentum with each passing yard. 20 miles per hour, 30, 35. The incline of the hill provided gravity as an accomplice. She wasn't deviating, she wasn't slowing, she was targeting. I observed the precise instant of her commitment, a subtle leftward tug of the steering wheel, followed by a sharp correction to the right, aligning the vehicle's grille directly with Sarge, as if threading a needle with 2 tons of steel and fury. Jack's hand found mine again. His fingers were icy. Daddy. Time seemed to slow, becoming viscous. The navigator crossed the invisible boundary of our property line. The front tires bumped over the buried curb with a soft thud, captured by the microphone with startling clarity, akin to a gunshot. Snow erupted outwards in twin plumes. The hood ornament, a chrome knight on horseback, flashed momentarily in the sun before being swallowed by a wall of white. 10 feet. 5. Impact. The sound was not a crunch. It was an explosion. A deep, resonant boom that rolled down the street like a thunderous bowling ball. The entire house vibrated. Coffee sloshed over the rim of my mug, searing a stripe across my wrist, yet I felt no pain. On the monitor, the Lincoln's front end crumpled like cheap origami. The hood buckled upwards in a perfect V-shape. Steam billowed violently from the radiator in a white torrent. Both airbags deployed with muted thuds that seemed almost gentle in comparison to the carnage unfolding outside. The windshield fractured from corner to corner, creating a lightning bolt pattern of shattered safety glass, and Sarge hadn't budged, not by a single inch. A fresh indentation the size of a dinner plate marred his midsection where the satellite dish had absorbed the primary impact. One of his scarves had been ripped away entirely, flung 20 feet into the yard like a tattered flag of surrender. Yet the frost giant stood precisely where he had been positioned, his banana nose still tilted in a defiant smirk, his shielded arm still held aloft in a salute of defiance. The navigator, meanwhile, had recoiled as if it had struck a bridge abutment. It sat askew in my yard, its front wheels buried to the hubs. Steam hissed, and its hazard lights blinked forlornly in the ensuing silence. Jack emitted a sound that was a peculiar blend of a war cry and a sob. She hit him. She actually hit him, and he didn't even flinch. I was already in motion, pulling on my boots, grabbing my phone, and initiating a recording before I even reached the front door. "Stay here," I instructed him. "No way." He was right behind me, his boots half-laced, his cheeks flushed crimson from the cold and the thrill of victory. By the time we stepped outside, half the neighborhood was emerging from their homes like survivors from bunkers. Garage doors rumbled open, front doors cracked ajar. People stood on porches and in doorways, clad in slippers, their breath misting as they raised their phones. Someone began to clap slowly. Another whistled the opening notes of Sweet Caroline for reasons that would forever remain unexplained. Karen was still behind the wheel, her hands frozen at 10 and 2 o'clock, staring through the fractured windshield as if she had just discovered that gravity was a mere suggestion. The deflated airbag draped across her chest like a sorrowful white shroud. A thin trickle of blood traced a path from her hairline where her head had made contact with the visor. I approached slowly, my boots crunching, my phone held high and recording in glorious 4K resolution. "Are you all right in there, Madam President?" I called out, my voice possessing a calmness that could cut through glass. Her window was cracked open about 6 inches. Cold air poured in, and heat escaped. It didn't move," she whispered, as if vocalizing it would diminish its veracity. "Nope. You booby-trapped it." "Built a snowman on my own property," I corrected. "You're the one who decided to play demolition derby at 40 miles per hour on an icy road in a residential neighborhood during blizzard recovery." From the sidewalk, Rosa appeared, her phone held aloft, live streaming to the neighborhood Facebook group, a platform I hadn't realized existed until that moment. "Is she injured?" Rosa inquired, her tone devoid of genuine concern. "Physically, it appears pride is the only broken bone." Karen finally located the door handle. She stumbled out wearing 4-inch snow boots and a cream-colored wool coat, now dusted white like a powdered donut. The airbag had left a distinct red welt across her throat. "My car is destroyed," she shrieked, her voice cracking through the frozen air. "You destroyed it," I countered. "On private property, with intent. I have 4 camera angles. I'll sue you for every cent you possess." "Go ahead," I replied, a smile playing on my lips. "Discovery is going to be quite entertaining. especially the part where we subpoena your GPS data and browser history for instructions on how to topple a snowman with an SUV. A ripple of laughter spread through the gathering crowd. It was at this juncture that the sirens finally arrived. A single patrol car slid to a careful stop, its flashing lights painting the snow in hues of red and blue. Officer Ramirez emerged, took one look at the scene, and actually removed his sunglasses despite the glare. Could someone explain why there's a luxury tank in a front yard and a snowman that appears rather pleased with itself? Karen lunged forward, pointing a trembling finger at Sarge. He rigged it! Metal rebar! It's a weapon! Ramirez raised an eyebrow in my direction. The snowman is on my property, officer. Constructed over a tree stump I've had marked for 3 years. She elected to take the scenic route through my lawn at considerable speed. Ramirez surveyed Sarge, then the crumpled navigator, then the multitude of phone cameras, now numbering in the dozens. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, "do you have a valid driver's license and a truly exceptional explanation?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. The only sounds were the soft hiss of steam emanating from her ruined engine and the occasional ping of cooling metal. Jack chose that precise moment to step forward, his boots crunching on the snow, and delivered the line of the century in a voice clear enough to carry 3 houses down the street. "That's what happens when you mess with Commander Sarge, lady." The entire block erupted. Someone began chanting, "Sarge! Sarge!" And within seconds, half the neighborhood had joined in, fists pumping the air as if we had just won the Super Bowl. Karen's face cycled through every conceivable shade of red. Officer Ramirez pinched the bridge of his nose, struggling to suppress a grin, and finally just shook his head. "All right, folks, let's get statements, tow trucks, and perhaps some hot cocoa before we all freeze solid." He then looked at me. "Are you pressing charges?" I glanced at Jack, his eyes shining brighter than the sun on snow, then at Sarge, standing proudly with his new battle scar. Finally, I surveyed the growing crowd of neighbors who, at this moment, were no longer exhibiting fear. "Nah," I said. "The insurance adjusters can sort this one out, but I'll take a police report for my records." Karen emitted a sound akin to a tea kettle on the verge of exploding. The tow truck arrived 20 minutes later. A large flatbed, its chains rattling, the driver grinning broadly the moment he surveyed the scene. He took one look at Sarge and let out a low whistle. "Quite the snowman, brother." Jack beamed. "Commander Sarge, sir, accepts your salute." The driver actually offered a salute as the winch began to hoist the ruined navigator onto the bed, its metal groaning in protest. Karen stood on the sidewalk in her 4-inch heels, sinking into the snow, her coat unbuttoned, wisps of her hair escaping her meticulously arranged bun like frantic signals. She appeared small. For the first time in 5 years, Karen Stapleton looked genuinely small, and somewhere within the throng of onlookers, their phones still recording, a new legend of Maple Ridge was being born. The frost giant had triumphed, and the seemingly insurmountable war was finally over. By late afternoon, the storm had completely surrendered, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt almost sacred. The sky was the color of a meticulously cleaned robin's egg, and every surface shimmered as if the world had been dipped in crushed diamonds. The tow truck had long since departed, taking Karen's mangled navigator with it, its metal still ticking softly as it cooled, pieces of bumper and grille scattered across the snow like remnants of a battlefield. Sarge stood precisely where he had been that morning, but now he wore his injury with pride. A perfectly circular indentation graced the satellite dish, serving as his chest plate, its edges curled inward like a shield that had deflected an arrow and laughed. One scarf was missing, having been blown clear into the Newans' yard, where their children were already utilizing it as a makeshift superhero cape. However, the remaining scarf fluttered in the light breeze like a banner of victory. Someone had tied a miniature American flag to his coat hanger arm. Another had affixed a toy plastic medal to his chest. The plywood shield now bore fresh red marker inscribed by unknown hands. Undefeated, 1 SUV, 0 karma. Jack adamantly refused to come inside. He stood guard in his full winter gear, his cheeks windburned, directing an ever-growing procession of neighborhood children eager to touch the dent, pose for selfies, or simply bask in the presence of the frost giant who had devoured a Lincoln Navigator for breakfast and requested seconds. I allowed him this indulgence. Some moments transcend the concern of frostbite. By 4 o'clock, the street had transformed into an impromptu block party. Someone fired up a gas grill and began distributing hot dogs. Mrs. Delgado arrived with a thermos of spiced cider that undoubtedly contained rum. Mr. Elkins, the tomato plant hero, appeared with a folding chair and a grin wider than I had ever witnessed, declaring he was retiring his tape measure in Sarge's honor. The Noyan set up a tripod with a phone attached and began live streaming the entire event to the community Facebook group under the title, "The Day the Snowman Won." Rosa texted me at 4:17 p.m. "Emergency board meeting just got cancelled. 3 members refused to show. Karen tried to convene it from her kitchen. Nobody came. Also, the video is at 87,000 views and climbing. You officially broke the internet, James. Proud of you." I read it twice, then handed the phone to Jack so he could see the small red heart icon. He looked up at me with an expression that was neither quite a smile nor quite tears. "Does this mean we won, Dad?" I ruffled his frozen hair. "It means we're not done yet, buddy. Winning isn't the end. It's the beginning of building something better." He nodded slowly, in that way children do when they grasp a truth too profound for words. At 5:03 p.m., she appeared, not in the SUV this time, but on foot, Karen trudging down the sidewalk in the same cream wool coat, now streaked with salt stains, and a mysterious grease smudge across the lapel. Her hair had surrendered to the wind, loose strands whipping across her face as if she'd lost a battle with a leaf blower. She carried no clipboard, no measuring tape, no printed violation notice, only her pride, battered and leaking. The hum of conversation from the crowd subsided to a murmur as she halted at the edge of my lawn, her boots sinking ankle-deep. Every phone swiveled towards her like paparazzi spotting a fallen star. She looked at Sarge, truly looked for the first time since the crash. Her gaze traced the dent, the missing scarf, the tiny flag fluttering from his arm. Something flickered across her face. Perhaps recognition, or maybe the first honest emotion she had allowed herself in years. Then she turned her attention to me. "I came to speak civilly," she stated, her voice thin enough to snap in the cold. I stepped forward, hands in my pockets, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough to become uncomfortable. "I'm listening." She glanced at the crowd, at the phones, at Jack, who stood protectively in front of Sarge like a 10-year-old Secret Service agent. "I didn't think it would end like this." "You didn't think at all," I replied, my tone not unkind. "You measured, you circled, you decided a snowman constituted a declaration of war, and then you drove straight into it." Her lips pressed together in a bloodless line. "If you will remove the footage from the HOA records," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I will withdraw the complaint I filed this morning." Jack actually let out a laugh, a sharp, bright bark that caused half the crowd to chuckle with him. I tilted my head. "You filed a complaint after totaling your own vehicle on my lawn." I had to protect the association. From what, Karen? From joy. From children laughing. From a father and his son refusing to let you bully them for one more winter. She flinched as if I had struck her. I took a step closer. "You had 5 years to choose kindness. 5 years to knock on my door and say, 'Hey James, tough break about Clara. Is there anything I can do?' 5 years to treat Mr. Elkins like a neighbor instead of a zoning violation. You chose control instead, and now you're standing in the wreckage of your own choices, asking me for mercy." I let that statement hang in the air. "I'm not offering you mercy, Karen. I'm offering you the same thing you've always offered everyone else. Consequences." She stared at me for a long moment. The wind picked up, tugging at her coat, whipping loose snow into miniature tornadoes around her ankles. "This will go public," she declared finally, her voice cracking. I smiled, a slow, genuine expression. "I'm counting on it." She turned then, her boots crunching, and walked away without another word. No dramatic exit, no final threat, just the slow, defeated retreat of a queen who had finally encountered a castle she couldn't starve into submission. Behind me, the crowd erupted in cheers and whistles. Someone even set off a leftover 4th of July smoke bomb, painting the sky in shades of purple. Jack looked up at me, his eyes shining. "She's gone, Dad. She's really gone." I pulled him into a hug, so tight his boots lifted off the ground. "Not gone," I whispered into his frozen hair. "Just human, for the first time in years." That night, I added 3 new items to the red folder. 1. Still photographs from all 4 cameras, time-stamped. 2. The police report number Officer Ramirez handed me with a grin and a quiet, "Good luck, Mr. Carter." 3. A single screenshot Rosa forwarded of Karen's emergency email to the board, titled, "Urgent, Hostile Resident." The reply all chain was a thing of beauty. 3 members had simply responded with the snowman emoji. 1 had attached the crash GIF that was already circulating widely. After securing all the documents in the binder and placing it back in the drawer, I prepared 2 generous servings of hot cocoa, each topped with a mountain of whipped cream, a fitting tribute to our recent triumph. Jack and I then settled onto the front porch, our gazes drawn upwards as the stars began to pepper the twilight sky. The familiar neighborhood, bathed in this nascent darkness, seemed to expand, feeling vaster than it had in ages. Sarge, our steadfast guardian, remained on duty in the yard, bearing the marks of battles past, dents and scars, yet undeniably unbroken. And for the first time since Clara's memorial service, the quiet around us wasn't oppressive. It was a profound sense of earned tranquility, a peace that promised endurance. 2 days post-incident, the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association dispatched its final official communication under Karen's tenure. The subject line read, "Official HOA Inquiry, Incident on December 14th. The prose, a signature blend of passive aggression and veiled judgment she had honed to perfection, remained unchanged. However, the signatory now simply read, HOA Board Secretary Acting, a subtle but significant shift, as Karen's name had been conspicuously erased from the letterhead overnight. Over breakfast, I read the email aloud to Jack, who, in turn, was constructing a miniature Coco Everest in his mug. "They're requesting the entire recording," I informed him, "for review and archival purposes." Jack chuckled, a dry, knowing sound. "They want to watch her humiliation in high definition, don't they?" "Precisely," I replied, tapping out a swift response that took less than 30 seconds. "Esteemed board members, I am delighted to furnish every second of footage, complete with timestamps, multiple camera angles, and full audio. I propose to present it personally at the upcoming open forum to be officially recorded and accessible for public viewing. Kindly confirm the designated date and time. Sincerely, James Carter, the gentleman whose snowman apparently possesses bulletproof resilience." 10 minutes later, Rosa's text arrived, a simple popcorn emoji accompanied by the message, "See you at the clubhouse." The emergency review meeting was promptly scheduled for the subsequent Tuesday. News traveled with a speed that outpaced even the most dedicated snowplows. By Monday evening, the clubhouse parking lot buzzed with an energy akin to the morning of a major sporting event. Attendees arrived armed with lawn chairs, thermoses, and in at least one case, an actual tub of popcorn. I entered, clad in the very same flannel shirt I'd worn to our initial confrontation, with Jack by my side, sporting his now iconic Team Sarge hoodie. Rosa greeted us at the entrance, a USB drive already in hand, meticulously labeled in Sharpie, "The Snowman Incident, Director's Cut." The board's usual meeting table presented a altered tableau. Karen's customary seat of authority was vacant. Rosa occupied the central position, flanked by Howard and 2 new board members who appeared visibly uncomfortable, their expressions suggesting a strong preference for being elsewhere. Karen herself was seated 3 places down, her winter white blazer replaced by a plain gray sweater, her gaze fixed intently on the table as if anticipating its imminent collapse. I inserted the drive, the projector whirred to life with an almost cheerful chirp. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, addressing those who might not yet have experienced our neighborhood's most talked-about holiday feature, and pressed play. 4 camera angles, perfectly synchronized, filled the screen. A hush fell over the room, punctuated only by the low rumble of the navigator's engine and the wind's mournful cry like a classical chorus. When the moment of impact arrived, that magnificent ground-shaking detonation, a significant portion of the audience visibly flinched. A voice from the rear shouted, "Touchdown!" and the ensuing laughter, rich and unrestrained, seemed to mend old hurts. As the final clip concluded, showcasing Karen's bewildered expression and Jack's perfectly delivered line, "That's what Sarge Lady gets," the applause erupted, its volume threatening to dislodge the very windows. Rosa cleared her throat. "Any discussion?" Howard's hand, trembling slightly, rose. "I move," he began, "to initiate an immediate ethics review of former President Stapleton and suspend all pending fines related to seasonal decorations, effective immediately." "Seconded," came the unified response from 3 voices. Karen sprang to her feet so abruptly that her chair, rolling backward, collided with the wall. "This is a lynching," she shrieked. "He constructed a weapon." Rosa's voice, calm and steely, cut through the outburst. "He built a snowman, Karen. You weaponized a luxury SUV. Please, sit down." The vote was unanimous. Karen Stapleton was removed from the board, her tenure concluded with immediate effect. No possibility of appeal, no parting severance of complimentary pastries. She departed without another word, the door closing behind her with the quiet finality of a tomb. The room erupted once more. A low chant of "Sarge! Sarge!" began, gradually swelling and spreading through the walls and out into the parking lot. Rosa found me later in the hallway, Jack dozing on my shoulder. "5 neighbors have already inquired if you'd consider running for president," she confided quietly, "including Mr. Elkins. He claims his tomatoes are already voting for you." I glanced down at Jack, at the hoodie now adorned with a small, dent-shaped patch lovingly sewn over the heart by Eli's mother, and at the mingled exhaustion and triumph etched on his face. "Tell them yes," I replied. January's special election marked the quietest revolution Maple Ridge had ever witnessed. No grand speeches, no ubiquitous flyers, just a single concise statement on the ballot: James Carter, transparency, common sense. Snowmen, welcome. I secured victory by a margin that would have made most dictators blush. In February, Karen sold her property. No fanfare, no farewell gathering, just a discreet "for sale" sign and a moving truck that appeared and disappeared within a single, nondescript morning. Rumor had it she relocated to a meticulously maintained gated golf community 3 towns over, governed by covenants, conditions, and restrictions so stringent that board approval was required even for a change of toothbrush hue. I harbored no ill will. Some individuals find solace only within smaller, more confining enclosures. The first official act of the newly constituted board was to condense the seasonal decor policy into a single, elegant sentence. If it elicits a child's smile and does not obstruct a fire hydrant, it is approved. We retained the essential community services: snow removal, street lighting, and neighborhood watch. However, every infraction now necessitated 3 signatures and a transparent appeals process. Meetings commenced with opportunities for public discourse and concluded with cookies. Genuine cookies, baked by Mrs. Delgato herself and laced with enough rum to inspire Howard to recount his Vietnam War stories. And every December, on the first Saturday following the initial significant snowfall, the entire neighborhood convenes in my front yard. Now officially designated as Sarge Square by unanimous accord, we dedicate ourselves to constructing the most magnificent community snowman Maple Ridge has ever seen. We no longer conceal the rebar, we proudly showcase it. Children contribute their parents' old hubcaps, license plates, and once even a discarded mailbox. We weld, we bolt, we laugh until our lungs ache from the cold. Someone invariably provides a fresh banana for the nose. Someone else consistently adds a new medal to the ever-expanding collection adorning its chest. We refer to the new creation as Commander, Sarge 2, 3, or 4. The number fluctuates annually. Jack is now 15, towering over me, his voice cracking like fragile ice as he learns to navigate the very streets where his colossal snowman once brought a Lincoln Navigator to a standstill. He still insists on being the one to insert the first piece of rebar himself. And each year, as the sun dips below the horizon and the streetlights flicker on, we step back to admire our collective creation. It's not merely a snowman, it's a testament to a promise that joy triumphs over apprehension, that regulations should safeguard individuals rather than confine them, and that sometimes the most potent act of defiance is to stand firm and refuse to yield. Last night, February's final snowfall descended softly and silently as Jack and I stood on the porch, enveloped in the same blanket Clara had meticulously knitted 15 years prior. He gazed at the latest iteration of Commander Sarge, now standing 12 feet tall and adorned with a cape fashioned from last year's Christmas lights, and posed the question he asks unfailingly each winter. "Do you think we'll need the armor again, Dad?" I drew him closer, feeling the solid, comforting weight of the boy who once fit snugly in my arms like a football and now nearly matches me in height. "I don't believe so, buddy," I reassured him, "but we'll keep it ready, just in case." He nodded, that familiar gesture signaling a deeper understanding than words could convey. For while some winters are undeniably harsh, and some individuals harbor unkind intentions, and some rules are undeniably meant to be defied by the sheer force of laughter, banana noses, and 10-year-olds who refuse to let their world diminish as long as snow falls, children exist, and stubborn old oaks endure lightning strikes, frost giants will stand guard, and somewhere, 3 towns away, within a perfectly manicured gated domain of identical mailboxes and pre-approved paint palettes, a woman who once wielded fear now meticulously measures her lawn with a ruler and scrutinizes her curb appeal each morning. She no longer offers a wave to snowmen. She knows better. Because every December, as the first flakes descend and the neighborhood gathers in Sarge Square, we remember that some things are destined to melt, while others are built to endure. And the ones that stand the proudest are those constructed from unadulterated joy, unyielding steel, and the quiet, unbreakable assurance that no one, absolutely no one, has the right to dictate that a child's world must be small. Commander Sarge proudly displays his original dent, a badge of honor akin to a Purple Heart. And each year, as his successor rises beside him, Jack renders them both a salute, precisely as I instructed, and as Clara would have wished. The story concludes here, or perhaps in the most fitting sense, it has only just begun.